Billionaire CEO about to marry sees with three identical little girls. What one girl says makes him stop everything. Before we begin, just know, no matter where you are in the world, I'm glad you're here. The Manhattan sky darkened without warning as James Blackwood stepped out of his gleaming office tower. He glanced at his Rolex, 2:30 p.m., exactly 2 weeks until his wedding to Victoria Pierce, the woman who would complete his perfect life. His phone rang, displaying his assistant's name. Mr. Blackwood, the wedding planner confirmed the string. Quartet for the Hampton ceremony. Miss Pierce requested you approve the final menu selection by tonight. Tell her I'll review it this evening, James replied, watching storm clouds gather. His tailored suit, like his life, was meticulously planned, nothing left to chance. The first heavy raindrops fell as he tried hailing a cab. Other executives huddled under awnings, protecting themselves from the sudden downpour. James prided himself on having overcome life's storms, building his tech empire from nothing. Now at 33, he stood at the pinnacle of success, wealthy, respected and engaged to the hotel heiress whose family connections would only enhance his empire. James Blackwood never gets caught in the rain, he muttered to himself with a satisfied smile, finally flagging down an approaching taxi. That's when he saw her. Across the busy street, a woman hurried along the sidewalk, shepherding three small children in matching colorful raincoats, red, blue, and yellow. Something about her graceful movements caught his attention. When she turned her head slightly to check on the children, James's heart stopped. Sarah Mitchell. The woman he'd left 5 years ago for his career. The woman whose tearful face had haunted his dreams in the early days of his success before he'd trained himself to forget. He stood frozen, taxi door half open, rain soaking through his expensive suit. Sarah hadn't noticed him yet, too focused on protecting the little girls from the downpour. They appeared to be identical triplets, approximately 4 years old, with golden hair peeking out from beneath their raincoat hoods. Then, as if feeling the weight of his gaze, Sarah looked up. Their eyes met across the crowded street, through sheets of rain and passing umbrellas. She froze, her face draining of color. One of the observant little girls in the yellow raincoat followed her mother's sightline. With innocent clarity, she pointed directly at James and proclaimed loudly enough to carry across the din of the city. That's the man in Mommy's special box that makes her cry at night. The world around James seemed to stop. Traffic noises faded. The rain became distant. He stared at the little girls, really seeing them for the first time. Their delicate features, the shape of their eyes, the curve of their small chins. His features. The revelation hit him with the force of a physical blow. These weren't just Sarah's children. The timing, their age, their familiar features. These were his daughters. Daughters he never knew existed. The taxi driver honked impatiently. You getting in or what, mister? But James couldn't move. 5 years of carefully constructed certainty crumbled around him in an instant. The perfect life he'd built suddenly felt hollow, like a stage set about to be dismantled. Sarah quickly gathered the girls, hurrying them along the sidewalk away from him. Before turning the corner, she glanced back once, her expression a complex mixture of fear, defiance, and something else James couldn't identify. The taxi drove away, leaving James standing alone in the pouring rain. His world irrevocably changed. By a chance encounter and a child's innocent words, he had daughters, 3 of them, and they had lived 4 years of their lives without him ever knowing they existed. James stumbled into his penthouse, dripping rainwater onto imported marble floors. The doorman's concerned greeting had gone unanswered. James could hear nothing but the echo of that little girl's words. Matthews, cancel my meetings for the rest of the day, he barked into his phone. All of them. His assistant's protests faded as James hung up and moved to his home office. With trembling hands, he typed Sarah Mitchell Interior Design into his search engine. Her professional website appeared immediately. Mitchell Design, breathing new life into historical properties. There she was, smiling confidently in a tailored blazer beside a restored Victorian staircase. The woman he'd once loved, now a successful designer without him. James closed his eyes, memories flooding back. Sarah laughing in their tiny Brooklyn apartment, paint on her cheek as they renovated their first home together, her sleeping face on Sunday mornings, her tears the night everything changed. 5 years ago, they'd been struggling together. Sarah worked at an art gallery while James pursued his startup dream from their apartment's corner desk. They'd shared takeout dinners on the floor, planning their future with hopeful naivety. Then came the pivotal investor meeting. "We'll fund you," they'd said, "but you need to relocate to Silicon Valley, immediately." James remembered pacing outside their office building, calling Sarah. "It's everything we've worked for," he'd explained, excitement overwhelming his awareness of the growing silence on the other end. "What about us?" Sarah had finally asked. "What about our plans?" "This is our plan," he'd insisted. "You can join me later." "James, there's something I need to tell you." "There's no time, Sarah. This is my one shot. I have to take it." Her voice had grown desperate. "Please, just listen." But he hadn't listened. He'd made his choice, ending their relationship in that single call, hanging up before she could finish. Now, staring at the evidence of what he'd interrupted, James felt physically ill. Those little girls, his daughters, would be nearly 5, now conceived just before he'd left. His gaze drifted to the engagement photos with Victoria displayed throughout his penthouse. The smiling couple looked like strangers to him now. His phone rang, Victoria's ringtone. "Darling, have you seen the tabloid piece about our wedding? They're calling it the society event of the year." Her voice was bright, excited. "Victoria." He couldn't form words beyond her name. "James, are you all right? You sound strange." He stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, the empire he'd built stretching before him. None of it seemed to matter anymore. "I need to handle something," he said, his voice distant. "I'll call you back." Without waiting for her response, he hung up and dialed his assistant again. "Matthews, I need you to find everything you can about Sarah Mitchell and her children. Everything." As night fell over the city, James remained motionless by the window, haunted by the image of 3 little girls in colorful raincoats who shared his features, daughters who had spent their entire lives without knowing their father. Daughters he hadn't even known existed. And somewhere in the city, Sarah, the woman who had once been his future, was tucking those girls into bed, without him. 3 days after the rainy encounter, James sat in his office, staring at the manila envelope his private investigator had just delivered. His manicured fingernails tapped against the rich mahogany desk, a nervous habit from his poorer days that resurfaced only in moments of extreme stress. "Is this everything?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Everything I could find, Mr. Blackwood," the investigator replied. "Ms. Mitchell keeps a low profile, but she's built quite a reputation in historical restoration circles." When alone, James finally opened the envelope. Photographs spilled across his desk. Sarah entering her Brooklyn brownstone, Sarah at a coffee shop reviewing blueprints, Sarah holding hands with 3 identical little girls outside an elementary school. His daughters. The formal report confirmed what James already suspected. Sarah Mitchell, 32, had established herself as a respected interior designer specializing in historical properties. Her business had grown steadily over the past 4 years, with recent features in several design magazines. The triplets, Emma, Olivia, and Abigail, were 4 years and 7 months old. No father was listed on their birth certificates. James's hands trembled as he read about their difficult entry into the world. The pregnancy had been complicated, the delivery more so. The girls had spent their first weeks in the NICU, while Sarah recovered from emergency surgery. She went through all of that alone, he whispered to the empty office, imagining Sarah frightened and in pain while he had been celebrating his first major acquisition on the other side of the country. A photograph of the 3 little girls in matching yellow sundresses caught his attention. Though identical, subtle differences emerged the longer he studied them. One smiled broadly at the camera, another looked slightly away, examining something off-frame, while the third gazed directly into the lens with a seriousness that seemed beyond her years. Emma, Olivia, and Abigail. His daughters had names, They had personalities. They had existed for nearly 5 years without him. His phone vibrated. Victoria calling again. James stared at her smiling photo on his screen, feeling as though he was looking at someone from another lifetime. "James," she began when he answered, "the wedding planner needs decisions on the flowers. The roses from Holland will cost extra, but Daddy says money is no object for his little girl's special day." Victoria. He struggled to focus, his eyes still fixed on the photograph of the triplets. "Are you even listening? You've been distant all week. The wedding is in 13 days, darling." "I'm sorry," he managed. "There's a situation with the new software launch. More important than our wedding?" Her voice carried a hint of the petulance that had once seemed endearing. "No, of course not. I'll call the planner tomorrow." After ending the call, James arranged the photographs in a row, his daughters at a playground, at what appeared to be a birthday party, and feeding ducks in a park. His executive assistant knocked and entered without waiting for response, a habit earned through years of loyal service. "Sir, the board is waiting for the quarterly projections and the Tokyo team has been trying to reach you since yesterday." James couldn't tear his eyes from the photographs. "Cancel the board meeting. Tell Tokyo we'll reschedule." "Sir?" Matthews had never heard such instructions in 8 years of employment. "Just do it," James said softly, finally looking up. Something in his expression stopped his assistant from further questioning. Alone again, James focused on a particular image, Sarah kneeling to tie a shoelace for one of the girls while simultaneously checking a bandage on another's knee and speaking to the third. The unthinking choreography of motherhood. That night, James dreamed of a sunlit garden where 3 little girls played behind a wrought iron fence. No matter how he called to them or tried to find the gate, he remained on the outside, unable to enter their world. He woke in a cold sweat, sheets twisted around him, with the absolute certainty that he needed to see them again. Not just see them, know them. As dawn broke over Manhattan, James stood at his window watching the city awaken. His empire spread below him, the buildings bearing his company's name, the products used by millions, the wealth that had seemed so important just days ago. All of it hollow compared to what he'd discovered. He had 3 daughters growing up. Without him, daughters who only knew him as the man in Mommy's special box, the man who made their mother cry. James picked up his phone and called the investigator again. "I need Sarah Mitchell's daily schedule," he said. Every detail. He was going to find a way into that garden, whatever it took. The cafe across from Sarah's Brooklyn brownstone provided the perfect vantage point. James sat at a corner table, baseball cap pulled low, sunglasses obscuring his face. The billionaire tech mogul rendered anonymous by simple disguise. For 3 days, he'd observed their routines. Sarah emerged each morning at 7:45 a.m. with the triplets, identically dressed but for the colors they wore. Emma in red, Olivia in blue, Abigail in yellow. Their matching lunchboxes swung from tiny hands as Sarah shepherded them to school before heading to her design studio. Afternoons found them at the local playground. James watched from a distant bench, heart constricting as their distinct personalities emerged through play. Emma, in her red coat, fearlessly scaled the tallest slide, arms raised in triumph at the summit, before plunging down with delighted squeals. A natural leader, she organized other children into elaborate games of her own invention. Olivia in blue approached the playground methodically. She built intricate sand castles with mathematical precision, each tower perfectly proportioned, her face a mask of concentration. When other children destroyed her creations, she simply began again, improving upon her previous design. Abigail, in yellow, spent most of her time on the swings, gently rocking while observing everything around her. She seemed to catalog the world, watching birds, clouds, and people with equal fascination. Occasionally, she would whisper observations to her mother, who always knelt to listen. What struck James most was Sarah's attentiveness. She anticipated their needs before they expressed them, offering a tissue to Olivia seconds before she sneezed, adjusting Abigail's scarf moments before the wind picked up, catching Emma at the bottom of the slide precisely when she needed steadying. Sarah, knew them in ways James could only envy. On the fourth day, James watched as Emma skinned her knee after a particularly ambitious leap. Before the child's face could even crumple, Sarah was there, producing a bandage from her seemingly magical bag. She whispered something that made Emma laugh through her tears. James's phone buzzed insistently. Victoria's name flashed on the screen. The fifth call that hour. Wedding details demanding attention. Caterers requiring decisions. The future he'd planned unraveling as he sat monitoring a life that had proceeded without him. He silenced the phone. A soft spring rain began to fall. Sarah efficiently bundled the girls into their colorful raincoats. Red, blue, yellow. The same ones they'd worn during that fateful encounter. As they prepared to leave, Abigail in her yellow coat suddenly turned, her solemn gaze sweeping across the playground until landing directly on James's hiding spot. For a moment, father and daughter locked eyes across the distance. A flash of recognition seemed to cross her small face before Sarah called her name, breaking the connection. That evening, James returned to his penthouse, greeted by Matthews with urgent messages and critical business matters requiring immediate attention. The foundation of his empire trembled with neglect. "Sir, the board is questioning your absence. The acquisition in Singapore." "Not now," James interrupted, moving to his window. The Manhattan skyline glittered before him, a testament to his ambition and drive. The empire he'd sacrificed everything to build, almost everything. His phone buzzed again. Victoria. The wedding was 9 days away. Invitations had been sent, arrangements finalized, society columnists poised to document the merger of two powerful families. James stared at her name on the screen, then glanced at the photographs of 3 little girls arranged on his desk. 3 little girls in red, blue, and yellow who carried his blood in his features but knew nothing of him. He declined Victoria's call and instead dialed his assistant. "Matthews, find me the best children's bookstore in the city." The time for watching from a distance had ended. Tomorrow, James Blackwood would take his first tentative step toward becoming a father. "May I help you find something special?" The elderly bookstore owner smiled at James, who looked distinctly out of place among the colorful children's shelves in his tailored suit. "I need 3 copies of the same book," James replied, eyes scanning the countless spines. "For girls. 4-year-old girls." "Sisters?" "Triplets," James answered, the words still strange on his tongue. The shopkeeper's eyes brightened. "How wonderful. I have triplet grandsons myself. Are they identical or fraternal?" "Identical," James said softly. "But they're different too. One's brave, one's precise, and one notices everything." The shopkeeper nodded knowingly. Children always find ways to distinguish themselves, especially multiples. She led him through the store. "Do they have favorite books already?" James swallowed hard. "I don't know," he admitted. Something in his expression made the woman pause. "New to their lives?" James nodded, surprised by her perception. "Then you need something meaningful, something that connects." She reached for a beautifully illustrated edition of The Secret Garden. "This was my favorite as a child. It's about finding something beautiful that was there all along, just waiting to be discovered." James took the book, turning it over, in his hands. His mother had read this to him when he was small before illness took her. He remembered the comfort of her voice, the magic of the hidden garden. "Perfect. 3 copies, please." Back at his penthouse, James carefully wrapped each book in different colored paper, red, blue, yellow, to match the girls' coats. He debated including a note, but decided against it. This gesture needed to speak for itself. The morning sky threatened rain as James approached Sarah's brownstone, the wrapped gifts in a simple bag. He waited until she left with the girls for school, then placed the package at her doorstep. No card, no signature, just a gift for the daughters he'd never properly met. Hours later, hidden on his now familiar bench, James watched as Sarah returned with the girls. She spotted the package immediately, approaching it with cautious steps. After examining it for a moment, she carefully opened the bag, revealing the 3 wrapped books. James held his breath as Sarah hesitated, then called the girls over. She handed each child the package matching her coat color. Little fingers eagerly tore through wrapping paper, revealing the identical books beneath. Their reactions were as individual as their personalities. Emma bounced excitedly, already flipping through pages as she walked toward their door. Olivia held hers carefully, examining the cover and spine with methodical interest. Abigail clutched the book to her chest, as though protecting a newfound treasure. Sarah stood motionless on the steps, her expression unreadable as she watched her daughters with their gifts. For a heart-stopping moment, James feared she would take the books away. Instead, she ushered the girls inside, glancing once toward the park where James sat before closing the door. That tiny gesture, allowing the girls to keep his gifts, felt like the first unlocking of a gate that had been closed for nearly 5 years. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Victoria's name illuminated the screen alongside a text about wedding seating arrangements. Reality crashed back upon him. He was engaged to be married in a week, yet here he sat, secretly watching another woman and the children he'd never known. As evening shadows lengthened across the park, James remained on his bench, contemplating impossible choices. His carefully constructed life suddenly felt like a house of cards in a gathering wind. Back in his penthouse, James found Victoria waiting, surrounded by wedding samples. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "The florist needed decisions hours ago." James stared at the elegant woman before him, beautiful, accomplished, the perfect partner for the life he'd built. Yet all he could think about were 3 little girls clutching books to their chests, unaware that their father had given them. "James?" Victoria's voice sharpened with concern. "What's going on with you?" He looked into her eyes and realized he needed to make a decision that would alter multiple lives forever, including his own. "Victoria," he began quietly, "there's something I need to tell you." Victoria's reaction had been surprisingly measured. She listened silently as James revealed the existence of his triplet daughters, her perfectly manicured nails digging half-moons into her palms, the only indication of her distress. "I need time," she'd finally said, slipping her engagement ring off to place it on his coffee table. "Don't make any decisions about us until I return." With those words, she'd departed for her family's estate in the Hamptons, leaving James alone, with the weight of his past and the uncertainty of his future. 3 days later, James sat on his now familiar bench in the park near Sarah's brownstone. Between his fingers, he absent-mindedly rolled a colorful rubber ball, red, blue, and yellow, swirls decorating its surface. The toy had caught his eye in a store window that morning, its colors matching the girls' signature coats. The spring afternoon was warm, drawing families to the playground. James had arrived earlier than usual, his mind consumed with the board meeting he'd walked out of when investor questions became too pressing. His empire was showing cracks. His absence felt throughout the corporate structure he'd built with such devotion. None of it seemed to matter as he watched Sarah's door open, revealing the triplets in their usual color-coded outfits bouncing excitedly down the steps. James didn't plan what happened next. The ball slipped from his fingers, rolling across the path directly toward the girls as they entered the park. Emma, ever vigilant and adventurous, spotted it immediately. "Look," she called to her sisters, darting forward to retrieve it before Sarah could stop her. James remained seated as the little girl in red approached, the ball clutched in her small hands. Her eyes, his eyes, studied him with innocent curiosity. "Is this yours?" she asked, holding the ball out. James nodded, heart hammering so loudly he was certain everyone could hear it. "Yes," he managed. "Thank you for finding it." "I'm Emma," she announced proudly. "I'm 4.5. "Hello, Emma," James replied, acutely aware of Sarah frozen several yards away, her expression a complex mixture of alarm and resignation. "I'm James." Olivia had followed her sister, analytical mind undoubtedly processing the interaction. Abigail remained by her mother's side, observing carefully as she always did. "Do you want to play?" Emma asked boldly, bouncing slightly on her toes. Before James could answer, Sarah approached, placing protective hands on Emma's shoulders. "Emma, we don't bother strangers in the park." "But he dropped his ball," Emma protested. "And it has, our colors?" Sarah's eyes met James's over their daughter's head. A silent communication passed between them. Recognition, wariness, and something like reluctant acceptance. "One game," Sarah said quietly. "The girls need to burn off some energy before dinner." What followed was the most extraordinary 30 minutes of James's life. The simple act of rolling a ball back and forth became a revelation. Emma threw herself into the game with reckless enthusiasm, laughing uproariously when James pretended to miss her wild throws. Olivia joined more cautiously, studying James's technique with serious concentration before attempting mathematically perfect tosses of her own. Abigail remained at the periphery until James gently rolled the ball directly to her feet. She picked it up, holding it thoughtfully before meeting his gaze with solemn eyes that seemed to see far more than a child should. "Did you give us the books?" she asked quietly. The playground seemed to still around them. Sarah tensed nearby, but didn't intervene. "Yes," James admitted. "I hoped you might like them." "It's my favorite now," Abigail said simply. "I like the part about the key." "That was my favorite part too when I was little," James replied, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. The moment was broken when Emma demanded another turn, reclaiming the ball with characteristic determination. The game resumed until Sarah glanced at her watch and called time. "We need to go home for dinner," she told the disappointed girls. To James, she added in a low voice, "Tomorrow, 3 o'clock, same playground, 1 hour." As the triplets gathered their things, Abigail approached James once more. "Will you bring the ball tomorrow?" "Yes," James promised, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll bring the ball." He watched them leave, Sarah's hand protectively on Abigail's shoulder, Emma skipping ahead, Olivia walking with precise steps. Just before turning the corner, Sarah glanced back, giving him a small, nearly imperceptible nod. James remained on the bench long after they'd disappeared, the colorful ball still warm from his daughter's small hands. His phone buzzed repeatedly. In his pocket, alerts from his assistant about the disastrous board meeting, messages from Victoria, and most significantly, a final warning about the Singapore acquisition falling through without his immediate attention. The empire he'd sacrificed, everything to build, was crumbling around him. The life he'd planned with Victoria hung by a thread. Yet as darkness fell over the park, James could think only of 3 pairs of eyes, his eyes, looking at him with curiosity, caution, and wonder. Of Abigail's quiet question about the books. Of Sarah's words, "Tomorrow, 3 o'clock." For the first time in 5 years, James Blackwood had a commitment more important than any business deal. He had a ball game with his daughters. James arrived at the playground 45 minutes early, unable to contain his anticipation. He'd spent the morning in a brief but tense call with his executive team, authorizing his CFO to handle the Singapore acquisition without him, an unprecedented delegation that had left his board members exchanging concerned glances through the video conference. None of that mattered now as he claimed the same bench, the colorful ball resting beside him. He'd added a bag containing 3 small kaleidoscopes, each wrapped in the girls' signature colors. The playground filled with afternoon visitors, but there was no sign of Sarah or the triplets. As 3 o'clock approached, James found himself checking his watch with increasing frequency, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. At precisely 3, Sarah appeared, alone. She walked directly to his bench, her expression guarded. "The girls are with their grandmother today." James tried to mask his disappointment. "I understand." "No," Sarah said quietly. "I don't think you do." She sat beside him, maintaining a careful distance. "This isn't a casual playdate, James. These are our daughters' lives." The word "our" hung between them, the first acknowledgement that these children belonged to both of them. "I want to know them," James said simply. "And what happens when you decide your real life needs attention again?" The edge in her voice cut through the pleasant spring air. What happens when the novelty wears off? James flinched. That's not fair, isn't it? Sarah turned to face him directly. 5 years ago, you chose your career over us with a single phone call. You hung up on me before I could tell you I was pregnant. The confirmation of what he'd suspected hit him hard. If I had known— What? Sarah interrupted. You would have stayed? Abandoned your dreams? Your investors? We both know that's not true. She looked away, watching children play on the swings. Besides, that's not the point anymore. What is the point? James asked softly. The point is those 3 little girls who have never had a father, who don't understand why other children have daddies and they don't. Sarah's voice trembled slightly. The point is, I won't let them be abandoned twice. James absorbed her words, recognizing the protective ferocity behind them. I'm not going anywhere this time. Sarah studied him for a long moment. Here are my terms, she said finally. You can see the girls 3 times a week, for 1 hour, each visit, always in public places, always with me present. No elaborate gifts, no grand gestures, no false promises. And if I agree, then you can be part of their lives, slowly, on their schedule, not yours. Her gaze hardened. But understand this. If you disappear even once, that's it. No more chances. I won't have them looking for someone who isn't coming back. James nodded solemnly. I understand. Do you? Sarah challenged. Your whole life has been about acquisition and expansion. Building your empire. Getting more. These are children, James, not assets. They need consistency, not intensity. The accuracy of her assessment stung. I'm learning, he admitted. I want to learn. Sarah's expression softened almost, imperceptibly. The day we met in the rain, I just accepted a major renovation project. The girls were excited because we'd just gotten ice cream to celebrate. She paused. That's what real life looks like, James. School drop-offs and skinned knees and nightmares at 2 a.m. It's not glamorous or exciting. It sounds perfect, James said honestly. A flash of vulnerability crossed Sarah's face before she composed herself. There's something else you should know. I tried to tell you about the pregnancy during our last call. I called you 3 more. Times after that, your number was disconnected. The revelation hit James like a physical blow. Sarah, I had no idea. I changed my number when I moved to California. I thought a clean break would be easier for both of us. The justification sounded hollow even to his own ears. Easier, Sarah repeated with a bitter smile. Nothing about raising triplets alone has been easy, James. I'm sorry, he said, knowing the words were painfully inadequate. Your company was taking off. You were in all the business magazines. I made my choice not to disrupt your life, just as you'd made yours not to be part of mine. James thought of the empire he'd built, the billions he'd amassed, the acclaim he'd received, and the hollow feeling that had haunted him even before discovering his daughter's existence. I'm engaged, he said suddenly, feeling she deserved complete honesty. Or I was. I'm not sure anymore. Sarah stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced hands. Figure out what you want before you see them again, James. My daughters are not a side project you can abandon when your real life gets busy. She turned to leave, then paused. Saturday, 11 a.m., the playground by the duck pond in Prospect Park. 1 hour. As she walked away, James remained on the bench, the colorful ball, and unopened gifts beside him. Across town, Victoria was reviewing wedding invitations that had already been mailed, planning the society event of the season with a space beside her that James was no longer certain he could fill. He had 3 days to decide which life he was, choosing the empire he'd sacrificed everything to build or the family he never knew he had. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm James never could have imagined for himself. 3 times weekly he appeared at designated meeting spots, playgrounds, children's museums, botanical gardens, always precisely on time, always greeted by 3 pairs of eyes that increasingly lit up at his arrival. He brought small, thoughtful, Gifts chosen with each girl's personality in mind. Art supplies for Emma's wild creativity, puzzle books for Olivia's analytical mind, and a star projector for Abigail's dreamy nature. Sarah permitted these offerings after inspecting them first, her caution gradually softening as James proved himself reliable. The hour-long visits passed too quickly. James scheduled his entire existence around these precious moments, shocking his executive team by rearranging major business deals to accommodate playground appointments. The Morrison acquisition meeting is non-negotiable, Matthews had insisted that morning. Singapore dialed in at 3 a.m. their time specifically for you. James had continued gathering his things. Reschedule or handle it without me. Sir, that's impossible. The board is already questioning. Then let them question. James's tone had ended the discussion. Now, watching Emma fearlessly climb the spiderweb structure at the playground, James checked his watch. The Morrison meeting had started 15 minutes ago, 8 blocks away in his corporate headquarters. His phone had been buzzing continuously in his pocket. "Higher, higher," Emma called. "Watch me, James." "I see you, brave girl," he answered, heart in his throat as she scaled to the very top. Nearby, Olivia was creating an intricate pattern with colored stones, her face a mask of concentration. Abigail sat beside him on the bench, quietly explaining the cloud formations overhead, information she'd gleaned from one of the books he'd given her. Sarah watched from a few yards away, her expression increasingly difficult to read. The wariness remained, but something else had crept in, a reluctant recognition that James was genuinely trying. His phone buzzed again. Without checking the display, James silenced it and returned his attention to Abigail's cloud lecture. Later, that evening, Michael Chen, his business partner since the beginning, confronted him in his office. "You left 8 investors sitting in that conference room," Michael said without preamble. "People who flew in from 3 continents. I had a prior commitment." "More important than the future of this company?" Michael demanded. James looked at his oldest friend, the man who'd stood beside him through the lean years and championing his vision when no one else would. Wordlessly, James handed him his phone, opened to a photo taken that afternoon. The triplets on the spiderweb structure, their identical faces alight with joy. "My daughters," James said simply. Michael's anger deflated visibly. "My God," he whispered, studying the image. "When? How?" "It's complicated," James replied. "But they're mine, and I've missed nearly 5 years already." Understanding dawned on Michael's face. "The schedule changes, the disappearances." He handed the phone back. "You should have told me." "I'm telling you now," James said. "Some things can't wait anymore." That night, as James returned to his penthouse, he found Victoria waiting. The wedding was meant to have happened 3 days ago. The cancellation had made headlines in society columns. "You've been avoiding me," she said, elegant even in her obvious distress. "I'm sorry," James replied, knowing the inadequacy of those words. Victoria's gaze fell on his desk, where photographs of the triplets now stood prominently displayed. "So it's true," she said softly. "The rumors about your secret family." "They're my daughters," James confirmed. "I only discovered them a month ago." "And us?" Victoria asked, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. James looked at the woman he'd thought would share his future, beautiful, accomplished, perfect for the life he'd been building. A life that suddenly seemed hollow compared to an hour on a playground with 3 little girls who carried his blood. "I don't know," he answered honestly. Victoria nodded, slipping the engagement ring from her finger and placing it on his desk. "I think you do." As the door closed behind her, James felt not the devastation he might have expected, but a strange lightness. One impossible choice resolved, making way for the more complex challenges ahead. "Dinosaur-shaped pancakes are harder than they look on cooking shows," James admitted as Emma giggled at the misshapen lump on her plate. "It looks like a squished frog," she declared, delighted by his culinary failure. "Mine is a cloud," Abigail decided diplomatically. "Mine is mathematically flawed," Olivia stated, though she ate it with gusto nonetheless. The Sunday morning invitation to Sarah's apartment had come unexpectedly the previous day. "Lunch tomorrow," she'd said as their usual playground visit ended. "At my place. Noon." The simple invitation felt monumental after nearly a month of supervised public meetings. James had arrived early, bearing groceries and ambitious brunch plans that quickly devolved into chaotic pancake experiments. Sarah watched from the kitchen doorway, amusement playing at the corners of her mouth as flour dusted his expensive sweater. "Girls, why don't you show James your room while I salvage brunch?" Sarah suggested once they'd finished eating. The apartment was modest but warm, exposed brick walls adorned with children's artwork, well-worn furniture chosen for comfort rather than style, and photographs chronicling the girls' lives from infancy. James followed his excited daughters down a hallway lined with their artistic creations, each carefully labeled with dates and names. The triplets' bedroom was a riot of color and personality. Despite sharing the space, each child had clearly carved out her domain. Emma's area featured action figures positioned in daring scenarios. Olivia's shelves held books arranged by size and color. Abigail's corner housed a collection of natural treasures, interesting rocks, pressed flowers, and a jar of particularly smooth pebbles. "This is where I sleep," Emma announced proudly, bouncing on her bed with its red comforter. "Mine has stars that glow," Abigail whispered, pointing to her ceiling where James's gift had been put to good use. Olivia showed him her desk, explaining her system for organizing homework with the seriousness of a corporate executive. James absorbed every detail, memorizing this space that had been their entire world without him. Later, as they finished the much-improved lunch Sarah had prepared, she caught his eye with a significant look, then gave a slight nod. The moment they'd discussed in hushed phone conversations had arrived. "Girls," Sarah began, her voice gentle but firm. "Remember how we talked about how families come in different shapes?" 3 identical heads nodded simultaneously. "And remember how you've been asking about your daddy?" The atmosphere in the sunny kitchen shifted instantly. Emma straightened in her chair. Olivia's fingers tightened around her fork and Abigail's observant eyes darted between her mother and James. Sarah took a deep breath. "James isn't just Mommy's friend, he's your father." A profound silence fell over the room. James felt his heart hammering against his ribs as 3 pairs of eyes, his eyes, turned to study him with new understanding. Emma, always first to speak, broke the silence. "Why didn't you live with us?" The directness of her question pierced him. James glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "I made a big mistake," he answered honestly, his voice thick with emotion. "I left to work far away and I didn't know about you. That was my mistake, not yours." "Didn't you want us?" Olivia asked, her analytical mind seeking logical patterns. "I didn't know about you," James repeated gently. "But if I had, I would have wanted you more than anything in the world. And now that I do know you, I want to be part of your lives very much." Abigail, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Are you staying forever now?" The question hung in the air between them, simple, devastating in its hope and vulnerability. "Yes," James promised, meeting each girl's gaze in turn. "I might not have been there at the start, but I'll be here from now on." After another moment of contemplative silence, Emma asked if they should call him Daddy now. Sarah explained they could call him whatever felt comfortable. Olivia, ever practical, suggested they might need time to consider the options. The guy. Conversation shifted as James helped them repot a wilting plant by the window, explaining how roots sometimes needed more space to grow. As Olivia carefully held the plant steady, she looked up at him and said, "Thank you, Daddy." Testing the word with cautious deliberation, James's eyes met Sarah's over their daughter's head, glistening with unshed tears at the gift of that single word. Hours later, after bath time stories and reluctant goodnights, James returned to his penthouse. The doorman handed him a manila envelope that had been delivered that afternoon. Inside, he found tabloid photographs of himself with Sarah and the girls at various parks and museums. The headline read, "Tech Billionaire's Secret Family Revealed." Who are the mystery woman and children? The perfect world he'd briefly inhabited that day collapsed around him as he realized their private journey had just been thrust into the merciless public eye. The tabloid exposure had immediate consequences. Photographers lurked outside Sarah's, Brownstone and James's office building. PR teams worked overtime crafting statements. The girls' preschool increased security. Within days, the media had unearthed the entire narrative. Billionaire tech mogul discovers secret triplet daughters, abandons society fiancé. Despite the chaos, James maintained his visitation schedule, arriving Wednesday afternoon at the Children's Museum where Sarah had suggested they meet, more private than the now impossible playground visits. He found the girls excitedly examining a bubble exhibit, but a new figure stood beside Sarah, an elegant silver-haired woman whose posture radiated protective vigilance. Eleanor Mitchell's resemblance to her daughter was striking, though her expression held none of Sarah's cautious warmth. "Mother, this is James Blackwood," Sarah said, her tone suggesting this wasn't a casual introduction. Eleanor's handshake was firm, her assessment unflinching. "So you're the man who suddenly decided fatherhood might be an interesting hobby." "Mother," Sarah cautioned, glancing toward the girls who remained happily distracted by enormous bubbles. "It's fine," James assured her, recognizing Eleanor's hostility as well earned. "Mrs. Mitchell, I understand your concern." "Do you?" Eleanor's voice remained controlled but arctic. "You think a few museum visits make up for 5 years of absence?" The triplets noticed their grandmother's arrival and rushed over, their excitement temporarily overriding the tension. James watched as Eleanor transformed, her severe expression softening as she embraced each girl, calling them by pet names that revealed years of intimate connection. Throughout the afternoon, Eleanor observed James's interactions with clinical precision. When Emma proudly showed him a craft project, when Olivia explained an exhibit with precocious detail, when Abigail shyly reached for his hand, Eleanor missed nothing. During a moment when Sarah took the girls to the restroom, Eleanor struck. "What exactly are your intentions here?" she demanded without preamble. "To be their father," James answered simply. Eleanor's laugh was brittle, a convenient time to discover paternal instincts after the difficult years are past. "I didn't know they existed," James reminded her. "And if you had, would you have abandoned your precious startup? Your investors?" Her precision cut to his core uncertainties. "Sarah was hospitalized with preeclampsia for weeks before they were born. Did you know that? She could have died bringing your daughters into this world." James absorbed this new information like a physical blow. "I didn't know." The girls were in the NICU for a month. Sarah slept in a chair between their incubators every night, recovering from an emergency C-section, pumping breast milk around the clock, terrified they wouldn't survive. Eleanor's eyes flashed. "Where were you then?" "Becoming a billionaire." Before James could respond, the girls returned with Sarah. Emma immediately grabbed his hand. "Daddy, come see the dinosaur bones upstairs." Eleanor stiffened at the title, but Emma continued, unaware of the tension. "Daddy makes the best paper airplanes, Grandma. Even better than yours." Something in Eleanor's expression shifted, not softening entirely, but acknowledging the reality of the connection forming between James and her granddaughters. Later, as they prepared to leave, Eleanor pulled James aside while Sarah helped. "The girls with their coats. Those little girls are my world," she said quietly. "Sarah, too. When you left her, I watched my daughter shatter and then rebuild herself around those babies. She's done an extraordinary job without you." "I know," James acknowledged. "If you hurt them again," Eleanor continued, her voice steel beneath silk. "If you walk away when this gets difficult, and it will get difficult, there won't be a third chance." Her gaze was unflinching. "No matter how many billions you have, I understand," James replied, meeting her intensity with his own. "I can't change the past, only commit to being present now." Eleanor studied him for a moment longer. "We'll see," she said finally. "Actions, not words, Mr. Blackwood. That's what those girls need." That evening, James sat alone in his penthouse, Eleanor's accusations echoing in his mind. His phone rang. Victoria, calling for the first time since returning his ring. "I saw the news," she said without greeting. "Triplets, they look like you." "Yes," James confirmed, uncertain where the conversation was headed. "You've already chosen your path," Victoria said, her voice remarkably free of bitterness. "And it isn't with me. I wanted to say goodbye properly, and maybe good luck." The unexpected grace of her farewell left James contemplative long after they hung up. Victoria had seen what had taken him far too long to recognize. Some choices once made redirect the entire course of a life. The question remaining was whether he was equal to the path he'd now chosen. "Do you think they'll like it?" James asked. Matthew, who stood bemused in the doorway of what had been the executive home office in James's penthouse. The severe space, once dominated by minimalist furniture and award plaques, had been transformed. One wall featured a rainbow mural, another held 3 child-sized desks in red, blue, and yellow. The central area contained an art station, bookshelves, and a comfortable reading nook with cushions and stuffed animals. "It's quite a change, sir," Matthews observed diplomatically. "The girls are staying overnight this weekend," James explained, adjusting a slightly crooked picture frame containing their latest crayon masterpiece. Their first time here. 2 months had passed since the tabloid exposure. The initial media frenzy had subsided into occasional photographs and speculation, manageable now that James's PR team had issued a straightforward statement confirming his newly discovered paternity. Sarah had cautiously agreed to the overnight visit, recognizing the girls' growing attachment to their father. Saturday morning found James nervously welcoming his daughters into his home. Their wide-eyed exploration of the penthouse was punctuated by excited discoveries. "A piano," Abigail whispered reverently, touching the keys with gentle fingers. "Your windows go forever," Emma declared, pressing her face against the floor-to-ceiling glass. Olivia methodically investigated each room, noting with approval the logical layout and storage solutions. When they discovered the playroom, their reactions validated James's efforts. Each found her own space naturally, Emma immediately climbing the small indoor slide, Olivia examining the educational toys, Abigail settling into the reading nook with a new picture book. Later they gathered at the large dining table with art supplies. James had planned a painting activity, carefully arranging brushes, watercolors, and paper. Each girl approached the blank page differently, Emma with bold splashes of color, Abigail with dreamy swirls, Olivia with precise patterns. "Your flowers are really pretty, Emma," James commented. "And Abigail, those colors blend beautifully." Turning to Olivia, he added, "Yours is so organized." Olivia's face fell immediately. Her brush clattered to the table as tears filled her eyes. "What's wrong?" James asked, alarmed by the sudden shift. "I'm never special," Olivia cried, her voice breaking. "Emma is the brave one, Abigail is the dreamy one, and I'm just organized." The outburst stunned everyone. Emma and Abigail froze while James realized his grievous error. He'd been treating them as a match set rather than 3 individuals with different needs and sensitivities. "Olivia," he said gently, kneeling beside her chair. "May I tell you something important?" She nodded, tears still streaming down her cheeks. "Being organized isn't just about neatness. It's about seeing patterns others miss. It's about solving puzzles." He pointed to her painting. "Look how you created this perfect repetition of shapes. That's not just organization, that's mathematical thinking, that's genius." Olivia's tears slowed as she considered his words. "Would you like to see something?" James asked, leading her to his home office while her sisters continued painting. Under Matthew's watchful eye, inside he showed her the complex 3D modeling software he used for product design. "This is how I build things," he explained. "It takes someone who can see patterns and structures, someone organized like you." Over the next hour, he discovered Olivia kept a notebook where she meticulously planned everything. Playdates, toy arrangements, even the family's grocery shopping. What he'd dismissed as mere organization was actually an extraordinary gift for structure and systems. That evening, as James tucked them into the guest room beds arranged side by side, he made a silent promise to each, to see them truly as individuals, not as parts of a matched set. The following weekend, he took Emma rock climbing at an indoor gym, her fearlessness finding perfect expression as she scaled walls with joyful abandon. The weekend after, he and Abigail visited the planetarium, where her thoughtful questions about distant stars impressed even the astronomers. And for Olivia, he created a special project organizing his extensive book collection, delighting in her systematic approach and careful categorization. Sarah noticed the change in their individual relationships. They talk about different things. Now when they come back from seeing you, she remarked one evening during drop-off. Not we did this with Daddy, but I did this with Daddy. They may look identical, James replied, but they're three completely different hearts. I'm just learning what each one needs. As he watched Sarah drive away with their daughters, James realized he'd never felt more fulfilled than in discovering these three unique spirits he'd helped create. Not as a uniform group, but as individual, girls with separate paths he was privileged to walk beside. James was reviewing acquisition documents when his phone rang. Sarah's name on the screen wasn't unusual. They'd established a co-parenting rhythm over the past 3 months, but her calling during his Wednesday board meeting was unprecedented. Sarah? He answered, stepping away from the conference table. James, I need help. The strain in her voice immediately set off alarms. Abigail has a high fever. Emma has her dance recital, and Olivia's science project presentation is tonight. I can't be in 3 places at once. I'll be right there, James replied without hesitation, already gathering his things despite the stunned expressions of his board members. Are you certain? Sarah asked. This is what real parenting looks like, emergencies during important meetings. I'm already on my way, he assured her, ending the call and turning to the board. Family emergency. Michael will take over. His business partner nodded, understanding in his eyes as James hurried out, leaving behind what might have been the most significant acquisition discussion of the year. James arrived at Sarah's apartment to find Abigail curled on the couch, her normally bright eyes glassy with fever. Emma practiced dance moves in her recital costume while Olivia repeatedly practiced her presentation, both casting worried glances at their sister. Thank you, Sarah said simply, relief evident in her exhausted face. Her temperature is 102.3. I've given her children's Tylenol, but it hasn't brought the fever down much. Go. James nodded toward Emma and Olivia, both anxiously watching the grown-ups. We'll be fine. After Sarah and the other girls departed, James sat beside Abigail, placing a cool cloth on her forehead. Hey, Stargazer, he said softly, using the nickname he'd given her during their planetarium visits. Don't feel good, she mumbled, curling closer to him. I know, sweetheart, but I'm right here. As evening deepened into night, Abigail's fever continued to rise despite medication. Her breathing became slightly labored, each small cough sending spikes of fear through James. For the first time in his adult life, he confronted a problem his wealth and power couldn't solve. He couldn't negotiate with a virus, couldn't intimidate a fever into submission. The vulnerability was terrifying. James checked her temperature hourly, applied cool compresses and offered small sips of water. Between readings, he read her favorite books, his voice steady despite his growing concern. And the secret garden bloomed and bloomed, he read softly, Abigail's hot little hand clasped in his. When her temperature reached 103.1, James called, Sarah. Should we take her to the hospital? He asked, unable to mask his fear. Sarah's calm voice steadied him. Not yet. The doctor said if it goes above 103.5 or if she has trouble breathing. How does she seem otherwise? Tired, restless. She asked for you earlier. You're doing fine, James. Keep doing exactly what you're doing. We'll be home soon. Emma's recital just finished. Throughout the night, James maintained his vigilant post. When Abigail whimpered in half-sleep, he sang the lullaby he'd heard Sarah use. When she grew uncomfortably hot, he carefully sponged her arms and legs with lukewarm water as Sarah had instructed. This was fatherhood stripped to its essence. Not the fun outings or cheerful playdates, but the raw, frightening responsibility of a child's well-being in his hands. Sarah returned to find them both asleep on the couch, Abigail curled against James's chest, his hand still holding the thermometer. The fever had finally broken, Abigail's breathing now smooth and regular. "Hey!" Sarah whispered, gently touching his shoulder. James stirred, immediately checking Abigail. "Her fever came down about an hour ago," he reported. 100.1 at last check. The relief in Sarah's eyes mirrored his own. "Thank you," she said simply. Next morning, as Abigail rested comfortably with her sisters, keeping vigorous but whispered watch, James's phone rang. Michael's name appeared on the screen. "The Singapore deal fell through," his partner reported without preamble. "They weren't willing to negotiate without you present. 5 months ago, this news would have devastated James. The acquisition had been in progress for over a year, representing potential billions in growth." "I understand," James replied, watching Abigail sip apple juice on the couch. It was the right call. After ending the call, James sat beside his daughters, helping Emma build a get-well card for her sister, while Olivia read aloud from Abigail's favorite book. The empire he'd spent a decade building had just lost a cornerstone opportunity. Somehow, it barely seemed to matter at all. "Remember, Grandma's making her special lasagna tonight," Sarah reminded James as she dropped off the girls for their Saturday visit. "Dinner at 6. Don't be late. She still times your arrivals to the minute." 4 months of consistent presence had softened Sarah's wariness into a tentative co-parenting partnership. But Eleanor Mitchell remained the family's skeptical guardian. The weekly Sunday dinners at Sarah's apartment had become a tradition, with Eleanor's critical gaze monitoring James's every interaction with her granddaughters. "We'll be punctual," James promised, already dressed in clothes selected by the girls for their museum outing, a casual sweater and jeans that had replaced his customary tailored suits during family time. The Metropolitan Museum of Art's children's program captivated the triplets, each engaging in her characteristic way. Emma racing from exhibit to exhibit with boundless energy, Olivia methodically reading every plaque, Abigail dreamily absorbing the colors and textures of ancient artifacts. James had learned to divide his attention effectively between them, keeping Emma from climbing the Egyptian sarcophagus while discussing Mesopotamian number systems with Olivia, and listening to Abigail's whispered observations about the quality of light through the glass ceiling. They arrived at Sarah's apartment precisely at 6 o'clock. Eleanor opened the door, her silver hair elegantly styled, her expression inscrutable as she assessed them. "Right on time," she noted with the faintest hint of approval. The apartment smelled of rich tomato sauce and herbs. The girls rushed to wash their hands, chattering about museum treasures as Eleanor led James to the living room, where Sarah was setting the table. Throughout dinner, James noticed Eleanor observing him, how he remembered Olivia disliked her food, touching, how he helped Emma cut her lasagna into manageable bites, how he listened attentively to Abigail's whispered commentary about the Parmesan cheese looking like snow. After the meal, the girls disappeared to their room, returning with construction paper and markers. "We made a project for school," Emma announced proudly, spreading the papers across the coffee table. "It's called Our Family," Olivia explained with characteristic precision. "We had to draw the important people." The colorful drawings featured stick figures labeled in childish handwriting: Mommy, Emma, Olivia, Abigail, Grandma, and Daddy. James's figure appeared in all 3 drawings, depicted with varying degrees of artistic skill, but unmistakable affection. James felt Eleanor's gaze on him as he praised each artwork with specific, thoughtful comments. When he looked up, something in her expression had shifted. Later, as Sarah put the girls to bed, Eleanor gestured James into the kitchen where she was preparing dessert. "You're still learning," she said without preamble. "But at least you're staying to learn." The simple acknowledgement coming from this formidable woman who had every reason to doubt him struck James deeply. "I'm trying," he replied honestly. Eleanor nodded, handing him a knife. "Make yourself useful. Cut the strawberries." For the shortcake, they worked in companionable silence until Eleanor opened a drawer and withdrew a photo album. "I suppose you should see these," she said, placing it between them. if you're going to be part of their history. Inside were photographs James had never seen, the triplets as newborns in the NICU, tiny bodies connected to monitors and tubes. Sarah, exhausted but radiant, holding them for the first time. Their first birthday, first steps, first day of preschool. They were so small, James whispered, touching the plastic covering a photo of the girls sleeping in a single hospital bassinet, their identical faces peaceful despite the medical paraphernalia surrounding them. 2 pounds 4 ounces each, Eleanor confirmed. The doctors weren't certain they'd all survive the first night. As they turned pages, Eleanor provided commentary. The night Abigail had croup and terrified them all. Emma's first broken bone from climbing the bookshelf. Olivia organizing her toys alphabetically before she could properly speak. They should know their history, Eleanor said finally, closing the album. All of it. In that moment, James understood she wasn't just showing him what he'd missed. She was offering him a place in their continuing story. When Sarah returned from bedtime rituals, she found her mother teaching James her secret lasagna recipe. His expensive watch set aside as he kneaded dough for garlic knots under her critical instruction. Too thin, Eleanor critiqued. You're not making crepes. Put some muscle into it. The sight of the silver-haired matriarch and the billionaire executive, covered in flour, earnestly discussing proper dough consistency, made Sarah pause in the doorway. Something fundamental had shifted in her carefully balanced world. As James left that evening, Eleanor handed him a container of leftover lasagna and a handwritten recipe card. Practice this. Next Sunday you're cooking. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but it was acceptance, offered in small increments rather than grand gestures, measured in strawberries cut and recipes shared and photographs revealed. For James, it was more than enough. Daddy, you're doing it wrong again, Emma giggled, watching James struggle with the pancake batter. It's supposed to be runny, not like Play-Doh. More milk, Olivia instructed decisively, consulting the recipe card she'd meticulously copied from Eleanor. Exactly 3 tablespoons more. Abigail silently pushed the measuring spoons toward him, her expression encouraging despite the culinary disaster unfolding on the counter. 6 months after reconnecting with his daughters, James had established Sunday pancake breakfasts as their special tradition. Despite his limited cooking skills, the girls delighted in the chaotic process as much as the occasionally edible results. James's life had transformed completely. He delegated day-to-day operations of his company to Michael and a carefully selected executive team, restructuring his role to focus on long-term strategy that required less travel and fewer late nights. He'd moved from his sleek Manhattan penthouse to a family-friendly apartment closer to the girls' school and Sarah's home, sacrificing exclusivity for convenience without a second thought. Their co-parenting arrangement had evolved into a surprisingly functional system. James handled school pickups 3 days a week, attended parent-teacher conferences alongside Sarah, and maintained a detailed calendar of dance recitals, science fairs, and doctor appointments. The girls spent alternate weekends with him, their belongings gradually accumulating in their bedrooms at his new apartment. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening as James helped the girls with homework during his regular weeknight dinner visit. James, Sarah's voice sounded strained. I hate to ask, but I need to go to the hospital. My side has been hurting all day and now it's unbearable. The doctor thinks it might be appendicitis. I'm on my way, he replied immediately. The girls are with me. We'll be fine. Are you sure? My mother is visiting her sister in Boston, James finished. I've got this, Sarah. Just take care of yourself. What followed was the most intense week of James's life. Between hospital visits to Sarah, who indeed required emergency appendectomy surgery, he managed the complete choreography of raising 3 children alone, morning routines with hair-brushing challenges, school drop-offs and pickups, homework, supervision, meals, baths, and bedtime stories. He learned that Emma needed her stuffed triceratops to sleep, that Olivia's socks had to be arranged by color in her drawer, and that Abigail required precisely 2 bedtime stories. No more, no less. to settle for the night. He memorized medication schedules when Olivia developed a cold, mastered the art of detangling 3 identical heads of hair without tears, mostly, and discovered that the proper response to "I'm bored" was never, "Have you done your homework?" Unless he wanted synchronized eye-rolling from 3 directions. When Sarah returned home after 5 days in the hospital, she found not the disaster she'd feared, but a functioning household. James had rearranged his entire schedule, conducting business via video calls during school hours and after bedtime, prioritizing the girls' stability above all else. "You managed," Sarah observed with surprised approval as James efficiently served dinner, helped with homework, and supervised toothbrushing. "We did fine," he replied simply, "though I'm not sure my pancakes will ever meet Eleanor's standards." 2. Weeks later, during the parent-teacher conference at the girls' school, their teacher, Ms. Peterson, referred to them as co-parents without hesitation. Neither Sarah nor James corrected her. "Emma's leadership skills are developing nicely," Ms. Peterson noted, "though we're working on her tendency to climb things that aren't meant for climbing." "That sounds familiar," Sarah said with a meaningful glance at James, who had recently caught their daughter attempting to scale his bookshelf. "Olivia continues to excel academically," the teacher continued. "Her organizational abilities are remarkable for her age. She reorganized my entire filing system," James shared with pride. "It actually makes more sense now. And Abigail's artistic talents are blossoming. Her observations are quite profound for a 5-year-old. As they left the conference, walking together toward the playground where Eleanor waited with the girls, Sarah said quietly, "We're actually doing this, aren't we? Co-parenting." "We are," James agreed. "Who would have thought?" Ahead of them, Emma spotted them first, racing toward them with characteristic enthusiasm. Olivia followed at a more measured pace, while Abigail walked hand in hand with Eleanor, who nodded approvingly at James. "Daddy," Emma launched herself into James's arms. "Did Ms. Peterson say I'm the best at science?" "She said you're all doing wonderfully," James replied diplomatically, setting her down to greet her sisters. Watching the 3 girls chattering excitedly about their day, James realized how completely his definition of success had transformed. The empire he'd built, the acquisitions and achievements that had once defined him, seemed hollow compared to Emma's boisterous laugh, Olivia's clever observations, and Abigail's quiet trust. He'd finally found what truly mattered, hidden in plain sight all along, like a secret garden waiting to be discovered. 1 year to the day after that rainy Manhattan afternoon when James first glimpsed his daughters across a crowded street, he sat on a bench in Prospect Park watching them play. The weather was perfect, spring sunshine warming the air, cherry blossoms drifting on gentle breezes, children's laughter floating across the playground. How different his life had become in 12 short months. He now knew that Abigail feared thunderstorms and would crawl into bed with her sisters during lightning, that Olivia needed her books arranged by color on her shelf, or she couldn't fall asleep, that Emma couldn't part with her plush dinosaur no matter how ragged it became. He knew the precise shade of pink that made Emma wrinkle her nose in disgust, the exact temperature Olivia preferred her hot chocolate, and the specific way Abigail liked her hair braided for special occasions. He'd memorized their allergies, their shoe sizes, their favorite songs. He could distinguish their nearly identical voices on the phone and recognize which girl had created which artwork without names attached. "Penny for your thoughts," Sarah said, joining him on the bench as Eleanor supervised the girls at the jungle gym. "Just reflecting," James replied. 1 year ago today." Sarah nodded, understanding immediately. "You've come a long way from the man in the rain." "We all have," James observed. "I never imagined we could reach this point." They sat in companionable silence, watching Eleanor demonstrate proper monkey bar technique to an enthusiastic Emma. Their relationship had evolved into something neither could have predicted, not quite friendship, but a partnership built on mutual respect and shared devotion to 3 little girls. Abigail broke away from her sisters and ran toward them, climbing onto James's lap with the easy familiarity of absolute trust. She leaned close to his ear, her voice a characteristic whisper. "Mommy doesn't put the sad box under her bed anymore," James and Sarah exchanged a startled glance, both remembering that first chance encounter and the innocent words that had changed everything. That's the man in Mommy's special box that makes her cry at night. Sarah's cheeks flushed slightly. I was going through old things last week, she explained. The girls helped me organize. Into recycling, keepsakes, and donations, James finished, recalling Olivia's detailed explanation of the system. Sarah nodded, then hesitated before adding, I've been seeing someone. A restoration architect I met through work. It's still new, but that's wonderful, James said sincerely, surprising himself with how genuinely he meant it. You deserve happiness, Sarah. So do you, she replied simply. Abigail, satisfied with delivering her news, slipped off James's lap to rejoin her sisters. They watched her go, this thoughtful child who noticed everything, including the healing of old wounds. We should discuss summer plans for the girls, Sarah said. They've been begging for swimming lessons. I found a good program near my place, James offered. We could split the sessions? As they discussed logistics with the easy rhythm they'd developed, James marveled at how naturally co-parenting had come to feel. The initial wariness and resentment had gradually transformed into mutual respect, their shared love for the triplets building bridges across the pain of the past. Later, as they gathered the girls to leave, James found himself walking beside Sarah, with Emma skipping ahead while Olivia and Abigail compared notes on cloud formations with Eleanor. I never properly thanked you, he said quietly. For what? For raising them so beautifully. For being strong enough to do it alone. For allowing me into their lives when you had every reason not to. Sarah considered his words. They needed their father, she said finally. And you needed them even if you didn't know it. As they approached the park exit, Abigail slipped her small hand into James's, a gesture that still overwhelmed him with its simple trust. I'm glad you came back, Daddy, she said quietly. In that moment, all the success, wealth, and recognition he'd chased for years paled in comparison to the weight of his daughter's hand in his, and the sound of that single word. Daddy. The empire he'd sacrificed everything to build now seemed hollow compared to what he'd found in its place. Not in acquisitions or achievements, but in the daily, ordinary miracle of being present for the three extraordinary hearts he once almost lost. Full circle, he thought, squeezing Abigail's hand gently as they walked toward home. Not the end of a journey, but the beginning of one infinitely more valuable.